Hello, everyone. What an extraordinary honor to be here with all of you. I feel so excited to talk to you right now about a kindred species of ours, a species so humble, I find this so earnest, that until the late 19th century it was mistaken for a plant. This species is the sea sponge, which has been a muse of mine since I began this project. Oh, and these images are just going to scroll, so we'll roll with it. The sponges have been my muse since I began this project in 2006, and I want to tell you about an experiment from 1907 in which a scientist named H.V. Wilson pushed a living sponge through a sieve, forcing its constituent cells apart so that they crawled around at the bottom of a dish, found their like groupings, reconfigured and turned back into an adult sponge. So I'm going to read to you a quote from the Dawkins book, The Ancestor's Tale, about this experiment. And it goes, "The sociable behavior of sponge cells, as exhibited by such experiments, perhaps sheds light on the normal embryonic development of individual sponges. Does it also give us some sort of hint of how the first multicellular animals, or metazoans, evolved from single-celled ancestors? The metazoan body is often called a colony of cells. Could the behavior of the crawling and agglomerating cells in Wilson's experiment represent some sort of reenactment of how the first sponge arose as a colony of protozoans? And so, in my spongy worldview, which I'm presenting to you today, this sponge may be an originating model of collectivity." And just to go a bit further, I want to tell you that sponges on the reef filter food, eat, and distribute smaller particles of food to the organisms around them. They are an extraordinary exchanger. And finally, sponges have the distinction of being the only adult animals that don't move. They are deeply involved with sight. Okay. So, for a project that is participatory, that is about exchanging knowledge, what better muse than the sea sponge, and what better place to plant this project than a university, in this case, Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia, a public university with a very special art school called VCU Arts that is, for all intents and purposes, still divided by discipline. And so the sponge, in the form of the Sponge HQ, and you should be seeing images behind you, the sponge acts as a blender or a bender of disciplines, a place for cooperative work with students. And this project began in 2006 at MIT when I was in graduate school, another site of learning by doing. The Sponge HQ, which is sited on what has been, until very recently, the third floor of the University Gallery, has an indoor top bar beehive with honeybees flying in and out of the top window, a 90-gallon freshwater aquarium, a felting and dyeing studio, and a library. And I want to just quickly, because, wow, my time is moving, I want to quickly just draw a connection between the interlocking of wool fibers, the sort of macroorganism of the bees in the beehive, and this combination of sponge cells that is this originating collective. An example of a sponge project executed at the Sponge HQ is an experimental curriculum called Collab Lab Lab. Okay. For Collab Lab Lab, I registered as an undergraduate student at VCU. I signed up for a biology lecture class and a biology lab. And all of the students in my Collab Lab Lab course, my Collab Lab laborators, if you will, had to take those courses with me. So our class took a class. The Collab Lab Lab was the collaborative lab about the lab. And together, the students produced the Collab Lab Lab book, which is available on lulu.com. And they also produced a lab book or field guide to the Sponge HQ. And because they were the experts, They began opening the space to the public. They were the sponge monitors. And with them, I collaborated on several projects. And you're seeing images of that behind you. So what's come up here behind you are images from the 9th Mercosul Biennial in Porto Alegre, Brazil, for which 2 student sponge monitors and I traveled to Porto Alegre to cooperatively produce with mediators of that biennale 4 species of Brazilian sponge, 2 freshwater and 2 marine, hand-felted and hand-dyed with plant and insect pigments like cochineal bugs and indigo and weld. So one of those species that we produce, which would be exhibited in 2 recessed tanks on a former thermoelectric plant on the Guaíba Lagoon, is the encrusting freshwater sponge Oncosclera jueli, which was discovered by our interlocutor, a marine biologist who named that genus of sponge in 1962 when she was a sophomore in undergraduate school, and she colloquially called it the felt of the sea. This I love, of course. I'll skip ahead now because of time, just to tell you a little bit about where the sponge is now. So having produced a cooperative workshop in which the students and I traveled to the Museum of Modern Art in New York City to conduct a needle felting workshop with these material manifestations of sponges, felting into foam casts, beeswax casts, and bronze. And I also want to just dive in a little bit deeper to say that it was learning to scuba dive in 2011 that finally brought me face to face, if you will. They don't have faces, they don't have nervous systems. Finally brought me face to face with these animals and kind of inspired these more material representations of the project, these sort of hands-on manifestations of the sponges. So where we are now is that the Anderson Gallery at VCU, which is where the Sponge HQ is sited, is evanescing the excellent Anderson Gallery to make room for a new and exciting ICA in the city of Richmond, Virginia. And I mentioned that sponges don't move. So we're staying put. The HQ is staying put. And as I transition to a new project, which I'll share with you forthwith, the students will kind of take over the space with the space as a resource, with myself, their peers, their other faculty as a resource for continued production. And I will move on to this project that I have been exploring called Breathing on Land, and we should see some images of that towards the end of the show. That project involves, and has evolved from scuba diving to see the sponges, that project involves meditating on land with scuba gear. A team of participants clad in scuba gear, breathing in a landscape, deploying in landscapes that can be interpreted environmentally, and the participants have the experience of the meditation. The weight of the gear is it's constricting in a way that puts them in touch with their body. Their breathing, which I could probably replicate with my microphone, is sonically enhanced, so it becomes this kind of acoustic experience. But for the people who are viewing the project, the image is a kind of disjunctive suggestion to consider that landscape. So imagine, if you will, a solo land dive in a desert that will one day perhaps be underwater, or situating a group land dive on an ice sheet in Greenland, or in a coastal metropolis that is a part of our changing environment. And I want to tell you, since those are all kind of catastrophic situations for the land dive, I want to tell you about breathing with a group of people, see, he's sort of land diving, breathing with a group of people at a future pond site in northeastern Pennsylvania at a kindred project called Mildred's Lane, just on Thursday. And together as a group, conjuring this future pond, this body of water teeming with a diversity of life. And with that, I think I will slow down, breathe, and invite you to join me, if you choose. And give a shout out to all of the participants, interlocutors, thinkers who have engaged the sponge. A thank you to all of you. A thank you to Creative Time. And I guess a greeting to Paul. Thank you.
Hi, Hope.
Hi, Paul.
I'm just wanting everyone to remember this line. My class took a class. And I have a meta question for you.
Okay.
Because we saw Beatrice, and she sat on a sofa for 9 months, kind of drinking coffee, allowing 9 months to kind of understand her situation. And then Sarat computing, doing research from the vantage point of his kitchen table, looking out into the city. And then your sort of intense study of a myriad of things. And I wanted to ask you if you could tell us something about the role of radical curiosity in pedagogy.
Yes, curiosity is that, thank you, that's a very resonant word for me. And I would say that in my own practice, curiosity is the practice. Through my work, it's how I pay attention. It's how I learn. I learn through the framework of these projects. And these curiosities involve transgressing fields, engaging people, the social. And then with the students, the project, or with participants, the project invokes or permits a kind of radical curiosity. So especially within the context of the school, the invitation, within the context of a school that is about the study and production of art, the invitation is to know no limits with your curiosity, even as perhaps like the sponge, you plant and work towards a deep, sighted, situated knowledge.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.